Good day, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. Very excited to be talking with some really great folks who know their stuff. They've been in this industry for a while and been working on application and software security. We're glad to have you. Our topic is cloud is native, security is not. I think we've all lived that struggle, right? Our topic today and our webinar is put on by the great folks from Checkmarx. So I'm happy to be working with them today on this webinar. We do want to cover a few housekeeping items. We are recording the webinar, and everyone who's attending today will receive an email with a link to the webinar. Also be sending a copy of the slides that you can have. But really, this is going to be very conversational. I know that we have slides that one of our presenters is going to be talking about, our panelists, really. But it is going to be very conversational, kind of fireside chat-ish, if you will. So I think you'll enjoy it very much. We're also giving away 4 gift cards at the end of the webinar, so please stick around to find out if you're one of our lucky winners. Also, we just want to point out a few things in our interface, our hosting interface that we have here with this web application called BigMarker. There's some chat features, and feel free to comment. I'll be putting some things in chat. We can have sort of a running dialogue there too. So if you have some comments, etc., please jump in. The more interactive we are with both our panelists and as well as in chat, all the better. So we also have a Q&A feature. You're welcome to post your questions in the Q&A section. If you happen to throw one in chat, that's okay too. I should be able to keep track of those, and we'll have a lot of fun. This is going to be a great conversation. So let's move on to our topic here. That cloud is native, security is not. We have 2 great speakers today. First is Erez Yalon, who is head of security research at Checkmarx. And the second is Charles Kalaji, who is security analyst with Accelerated Strategies Group. I am also with Accelerated Strategies Group as the CEO and managing analyst. Erez, you want to take it from here and go ahead and introduce yourself a little bit more, give folks a little bit of your history.
Sure, my pleasure. Thank you for the introduction. As you said, my name is Erez Yalon. I'm the head of security research in Checkmarx. Also, I'm running and leading several OWASP projects, and I am the founder of the AppSec village in DEF CON. To be honest, I have a secret power, and the secret power comes to me because in Checkmarx, a lot of what I do is see mistakes that others do, that we do. And this superpower actually allows me to see the trends and where we're going. And to see where we're going, it's I think it's a cliche, but we definitely need to look back and maybe even to go down memory boulevard and see where we started everything, where we've been, and where we're going. So I think that maybe some of the participants today may remember the happy 2000, the era around the non-virtualized hardware, where we need to actually carry iron from a room to room to make sure that everything is actually working. We then moved forward to several different solutions of virtualization. From there, we moved to infrastructure as a service, which is that was a really huge jump. Amazon is an example. AWS till this day is a very good example for that. Later on, different platforms as a service like Heroku and open source. We saw a lot of open source infrastructure as code, infrastructure as a service like OpenStack. Later, we saw also platforms as a service, as open source, and containers, and what we talk today, cloud native. So these different layers are stacking on top of each other, and we're moving forward, and the technology is moving forward, and security is moving forward. But to be honest, it's not at the same pace. Unfortunately, technology runs much faster than security many times. And I think we actually see that all the time. So a brief history about that can be in parallel of the buzzwords of the year. So In 2005, I think the buzzword was around application security, and that caused the creation of checkmarks, my employer. I think that Charles can probably say something about coining this application security buzzword probably a couple of years earlier than that.
Well, as you said, Ezra, I did a presentation at RSA in 2004 called Application Security. But as you mentioned, it didn't really become the buzzword until later. So I was kind of just out there speaking, and people were slowly addressing it.
Yeah. So I think it sunk in, and around 2005 it became the buzzword or buzz phrase, this application security. And what we see is that every time we have a buzzword or a buzz phrase, we have several products that rise to the challenge and vendors that are trying to fix the problem. So if we skip to 2010, open source security started to be a thing with its own vendors. 2015, we saw a lot of container security issues and serverless security in the same year. 2019 was the year of API security. Everyone now needs to have API security, and for a good reason. And I think that 2020 became the year of the infrastructure as code security, or as we call it, everything as a code, because now really everything becomes available through code, through deployment of code. So we have many buzzwords, many buzz phrases, many topics, and many vendors, and each vendor is addressing something. And all these vendors have a very similar challenge. They can give you either very early results by scanning what you have, or actionable results by scanning what you do or what happens with what you have. And this is kind of a spectrum, because you need to choose between early results or an actionable result. And this is the first challenge I want to talk about today. We all know the shift left approach or the developer first approach. We know that the results that are shown early are always easier and cheaper to fix. They are better for security education because you can show the developer how to do it right immediately. There is a higher percentage of false positives. This is a real pain. And the results are fairly general, and we'll see an example in a second. When actionable results, you have the actionable approach. You see results arrive much later in the process, sometimes in runtime. Some would say that this is probably too late. On the other side, you can see lower percentage of false positives. You see results that are specific and actionable. And I want to show an example here for this claim of mine of early versus actionable. So let's say you have your code tested with some sort of open source tester, open source security solution, and you see that the open source package in your manifest is vulnerable to a specific CVE. Okay, that's great, but is my application exploitable? Am I really using the problematic part of this package? How do I prioritize it? Should I wait for a patch? Should I fix it? Should I use something else? Should I shut it down? Is it a game stopper? I don't really know. On the other side, if I look at an actionable result, for example, I'm running a solution that is tested and gets your method, a specific method, is sending tainted data to an exploitable open source vulnerability. This is much more information, so it is definitely a problem. I should definitely patch, fix, or use something else. But this is already running, maybe even almost on the verge of production or in production. Now going back to the drawing board is painful. So I would like to address the attendees here and have my first polling question. What kind of results do you prefer? Do you prefer them to be early and general? Do you prefer them to be late and specific? Maybe you're not sure. What say you?
And we have that poll active, Erez. So if you go to the poll tab just to the right, everyone who's participating, I'd love to have your responses. We're getting those already. So we'll give a few seconds here for folks to give a chance to share with us.
Yeah, and while we have just a moment of downtime, I just want to introduce myself and say thank you, Mitch and Ezra. So, as I've been in the security space for a long time, as was mentioned, and software security is one of the things that I've been talking about, evangelizing on for almost 20 years, and it's always great to talk about this subject and to move forward, because it is so important, as we're going to talk about in general. But software is everything, and in business. So I'm interested to go back to probably start talking about the results on the poll so far.
Yeah, we just closed that poll, and it's our mix is 63% early and general, so falling into that category, and just a smattering, 21, 16% in late and specific versus not sure. So those are roughly pretty close to each other at 21 and 16%. So by far our audience is very much in the A camp, if you will.
Yeah, sounds like that. To be honest, I always say there is no right answer to this. I don't know. What do you guys think? Is there a right answer here?
I think, as you brought up, that when you're talking about the types of results you're getting is what's really the issue here. And as you mentioned, a lot of false positives. That's always been kind of one of the drawbacks for the application security. But on the other side is you're going to be having stronger code and not potentially releasing some code with vulnerabilities. So it is a good quandary. I personally think I'm on the early side, but I'm not a developer, so I'm a security guy. So the earlier you get, the better. But I can see how the false positives and being more general can be difficult for developers.
Okay, I can tell you. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, Erez, I was going to just jump in. I think the progression kind of represents what's happened in the industry. I just put a little question into the chat about when did you begin in security? Security used to be sort of the outer defense, right? The hard shell, soft inside. And it was a network thing. Now it's an everything thing, right? So especially as software architectures have become more porous with cloud native and containers and service meshes and serverless, and it's really, how do we protect all parts of our technology stack, if you want to think of it that way. So I think that has been sort of the rise in interest in shift left and DevSecOps and things like that, of how do we think about security earlier in the process. And of course, we still have to live in a world of SOCs and things we do to monitor and understand attacks and threats and things that are happening. So it's a little bit of both, probably.
Yeah, probably a little of both. And what we see, I think, in the field is that the security teams in vendors that are more professional, let's say, or more experienced than others, they would prefer the early results, even at the cost of false positives, because they know how to triage and how to handle these false positives. Smaller teams or maybe teams that are not totally secure at their application security methodologies sometimes prefer the later ones that are more specific. But again, this is a very big generalization, and I'm not. I cannot back anything with numbers. Just a feeling I have, a subjective feeling.
Yeah, Era's a number of the people in the chat talked about. It's one of those it depends issues, and it really probably does depend on the type of application, your timeline, all those other aspects associated with the development process. That is where you're going to put those results. So it's interesting.
So I think that it depends. Probably is the right answer, right? maybe I need to add another answer. Okay, so I want to move on to the second challenge. After this first challenge, I want to talk about the fragmentation. So we talked about different vendors for different pains or different security aspects. We know that we have our applications. They can be either something big or a microservice, but we have the code. And we all know that most organizations use some sort of SaaS to handle that. But then you have your open source. So you need a security solution to check your open source and dependencies. And then you have containers. Unless you make your own containers, you need some sort of solution to check that. And on top of that, you have the orchestration. Are you doing it right? Not to talk about API security, which is the connecting glue between everything and everywhere. And to top it all, we now have infrastructure as code, which means that everything is controlled through files. And each of these parts or building blocks needs a solution to make sure that it is secure. And this is a lot. And like the joke of how many engineers you need to replace one light bulb. So I'm going to piggyback that and ask you, how many vendors does it take to secure a cloud-native architecture, a real cloud-native architecture? Which brings me to my second polling question. My second polling question.
That is active as well. By the way, I found the answer to that question, how many engineers? It depends on what kind of light bulb it is.
This is true. So how many security vendors, commercials, or open source software do you need to cover the different components of your cloud-native architecture? Is it just one or two, maybe 3 or 4, 5 or more? Maybe you don't know. What is the answers?
It's interesting. We've moved from, we just think about boxes in a rack, right? Right? How many pizza boxes, we call them, appliances, whatever the term was. And now it's, everything from threat monitoring, vulnerability scanning, securing the cloud architecture, securing cloud and on-premise environment. Just the landscape, the threat landscape of everything that we're dealing with, as well as what we're working to secure, is just so much broader. So it's natural to think of, well, am I going to have 1,000 vendors to do all this? Hopefully not, right? Can I have one? Maybe a handful of vendors, right?
Yeah. And I want to remind you that every vendor is a dashboard. Every dashboard has its own way of handling different language to customize. Yeah.
Okay. I'm going to close the poll here. We've got some great responses. And then, Charles, you can jump in here. The responses were 39% said 3 to 4, 22% for 5 or more, and also for not sure. So kind of fell into that camp, basically a quarter for each of those. And 1 to 2 was 17%. So certainly folks are generally speaking in that 3 to 4 camp or more, or I don't know. It's a non-answerable question, maybe. Charles, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, well, I think the issue and why you have to have more is because there's many components of the software security or in general the cloud security space. So you're going to have people that don't overlap with their tools. So that's kind of the issue of why you can't do just one or two, because no one's going to have all of the solutions. And the best part you can do is you have to find multiple vendors who work together. Interestingly, security, as you probably know, and Erez, I'm sure, deals with this in his research area, is that more and more security vendors, they cooperate, but they compete, right? So it's a lot of cooperation and competition at the same time in the security space.
That's correct. So I would say that the 17% that answered 1 or 2 are probably the lucky ones. Kudos. Or maybe you're not covering everything. I don't know.
We're just getting started is what I was thinking.
The ones who said 3 or 4, this is the majority here. And those who say 5 or they don't even know, it's probably... I think it shows us, again, this is a real pain, right? This is not something that is easy to manage. And the last challenge I want to talk about, I don't really have a name for it. So everyone who has a name for it is more than free to send it to my Twitter or LinkedIn account. I call it Legolizing or Legolization. It comes from the word Lego. And we all know that, all the parents at least know that when you walk barefoot at home, you realize pretty quickly that the Lego cube is the hardest substance on Earth. And this is our building blocks. Our building blocks can be very sturdy, they can be built well and very strong, but every child knows and every hacker knows that it's the way that you combine them together says how strong would be your fort or your house or your cloud native architecture. So basically, to have application security these days, it's not enough to scan and test your building blocks. You must have a holistic approach, something that looks at the entire picture and how it's connected. You need to see the application code security, you need to see the infrastructure as code security, and you need to make sure that the third-party components are secure and are talking in a secure way with your code. Which brings me to the vision. This vision is on its way. I don't think it exists yet, but this is definitely something we need to look at. Since we look at cloud native thing as one big unit with many building blocks inside it, this is what we need to look at security as well. We need a single repo to rule them all. So currently we have, let's say, Git. It can be any other solution. We have everything there. We have the microservices, we have our open source dependencies, we have the API security, either in the way of API gateways or others. We talked about containers and orchestration and infrastructure as code. And there should be some sort of platform in the middle of it, an application security testing platform that has not only the ability to test all of them, but also to make a correlation, some sort of mashup between all these results, and not just to tell us about a specific thing that was found in each of them, but to deduce and to understand the combination or the correlation between them. And I would like to talk about a few business cases or use cases. I think it would be easier to explain what I mean here. So this is an example I gave before, the exploitability of an open source vulnerability. If I look only at the open source, I know there is a problem, but if I don't check the code itself by SAST, for example, I don't know if it's exploitable. This is something that can help me decide if this is something real. If I have, for example, an overly permissive Docker configuration, I look at the container, I see that it has too many permissions, but I don't really know, is it supposed to have these permissions? If I look at the code, I know if it's supposed to have these conditions, these permissions or not. When we talk about a complex flow of attack, like an SSRF affecting Kubernetes management API, there are a lot of moving parts here. For an attacker, it's a single flow. For us as testers, as security people, it's extremely complicated. So we actually need a layer that can see the flow between our SAST results and Kubernetes results and API security. We sometimes see overly broad permissions or unprotected sensitive resources on our infrastructure as code. You can think about a bucket that when you scan it, you see that it is public, but is it supposed to be public? Maybe not. If you look at the code itself, you know what goes into that bucket. It gives you a new layer of information. And the examples can go on and on. I have several more here. For example, the exploitability of imported container layers vulnerability. You can see it and you can understand it only if you have visibility both into the code and to your Dockers. Or serverless, you need to scan both your code and your Lambdas in the infrastructure as code. So again, there are many different examples. I want to show one demo of that, of a prototype tool that we have. The story here is about a Lambda function. This Lambda function, or two Lambda function. Both of them are putting sensitive information into an S3 bucket of AWS, which means that we have sensitive data leakage. So you can see on the bottom left side, you can see the results. You see that we scanned the solution, and we see that we have these two lambdas, but one of them is a high severity problem because it puts sensitive data to a public bucket, and the other one is medium because it sends sensitive data leakage, but not to a public, but to a private bucket. Let's see the code and how it flows. So this is the most severe one. We can see that a credit card number flows through the code as one of the parameters, and it is placed in an object called another bucket lambda. We can also see that this bucket is public red, and this we see from the infrastructure as code. On the other result, we see a very similar flow that goes and puts credit card number on a bucket, but when we look at the result of the infrastructure as code scan, we can see that this bucket is private. So it is not as problematic as before. Yeah, I hear a question coming.
Charles was
so we had a question in the Q&A that I thought would be appropriate here because someone did ask, what do you mean by infrastructure as code? So I just thought it would be a good place to put that in about how, it's all about managing your infrastructure using software. So you're managing your cloud, your hardware, your virtual machines and servers and things in a code-based situation as opposed to physically being there and doing that activity in your data center. So I just wanted to kind of throw that in there.
Yeah, that's correct. This is if we talk about the memory boulevard from the beginning, we used to need a screwdriver to do that. Later, we need specific people who knew how to configure these metal things. At a later point, we have dedicated DevOps teams that really knew how to deploy and where to deploy and how to configure them. These days, it's all in the magic wand of developers. You just have these files, configuration files that we call infrastructure as code. You can deploy anything, anywhere in several clicks or touches of a keyboard. It's really quick. Sometimes it's too fast for our own good because of these issues that are easy to miss. But yeah, basically the configuration files of deployment of infrastructure, this is what we call infrastructure as code.
Yep.
Yeah, I was just responding to that in the chat too, in the Q&A section. So I think of it as two definitions. There's the really broad definition of everything is software, right? Everything from the firewall, the web application firewall, the routing, the front end of the network pieces, the container management system, Kubernetes, the software architecture. All of that is configurable because it's all software. And so to your point, Erez, there are tools like Terraform and other things that are specifically about configuring and dynamically configuring that environment that we're running our applications in, that infrastructure as code. And I liked your example that you were giving about what's public and what's not, because that can change. I mean, that may change unbeknownst to the developer, maybe even the security person. So that's part of the kind of landscape of what we have to think about that we're securing is what's private today might be very visible tomorrow, and we may not know that, right? So the parts, by the way, I love your hexagon as an old hexadecimal ASCII person. Yeah. I'm in my world of 16 bits. Sorry. It's a nice diagram because it helps you think about that's part of that environment that you're living in as software as code.
Yeah, exactly. And you just mentioned something interesting because you said that today it's private, maybe tomorrow it's public. Mm-hmm. And me as a developer, I may not know that, as you mentioned. And we see that. I see a developer writing a function that is totally safe, or at least he claims that it's safe because it goes to a private S3 bucket. This is how it was defined by him or by someone else. And this can go on for a year, and that's fine. And then one day, after a rough night of drinking, another developer decides that he wants to use this S3 bucket for another thing, but this thing needs to be public. Oh, this bucket is private. This is a problem. Let's make it public. I assure you, no one will know. If there is no very clear structure and process, no one will know. And only a scan that shows you that something changed, either in the code or in the infrastructure as code, as we said, the configuration that affects each other, this is your only way to know that. And this is something that when I said too fast for our own good, this is it. It's as easy as flipping something from false to true and the other way around.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's one of the great issues in software security is, and one of the areas of exploitation is when you build a secret into your code because you believe that your code is going to be secret, but it eventually gets released. So secrets built into code is a real problem. And as you mentioned, that you need to have a better understanding of where things change because you don't want those secrets to leak out, so to speak.
Exactly. And we look at the world of APIs and different components. Today, I'm giving my secret I'm component A, I'm giving it to component B, and everything is excellent and harmonic. I don't know if tomorrow component B will not decide to send it to component D, and component D is totally out of my control. I maybe don't want anything there. So this is the world we live in, a world that is so dynamic, and I'm saying dynamic in a good way. It's dynamic, it's scalable, it's really easy to deploy, it's really easy to modify. But this is what we're talking about security that is being left behind. And yeah, so I want to kind of wrap it up, these three challenges that I mentioned, and talk about this unified mashup that we believe is a vision that solves the challenges. What we have in mind is a single polymorphic engine that points to a repo. Just show me your Git and I will give you all the answers. All the application code, all the infrastructure as code, different engines running behind the scenes. I don't expect the developer or the security person to know each and everything that happens behind the scenes. But I do expect the stubborn trade-off of early and actionable to disappear, because now everything is the code. The mashup actually looks at the results, and without the need of running the code itself, it has the context of where it is used and when. So we will probably we still keep our shift left and have more and more actionable results. The annoying market fragmentation obviously disappears if we have one solution that rules them all. And this is not only convenient, but it actually gives us better visibility into our the entire project, because it's not just a dashboard that aggregates the results. It actually unifies them and give us more visibility into what is going on there. So what do developers or security people want? And maybe I leave it to the end if we can ask some people, but we all want seamless integration. No one wants to handle many vendors, many clicks, many dashboards. We want everything to be very intuitive. And as security people, we want things to be intuitive for developers because we know that they will use it. We want the early results, we want the actionable results, and basically we want to eat the cake and have it too. And hopefully this vision will actually happen and leave a lot of cakes to many people. So that was my deck and my topic. I think if we have questions, I'd be very happy to discuss more on that.
So I just want to jump in on Erez, on how you eat your cake, get your cake and eat it too. And it really comes down to a lot of the discussion is we've talked about developers and we talk about security and even, the Q quality puts in there. But the issue is, in reality, is we're all on that same team. So that we need to work together to get those processes that flow, so that we can deal with these issues and make it appear seamless, so that even when security or quality finds something near the production point, that they have a easy process to go back to the developers on that side. And one thing Checkmarx does a lot is education, right? So you guys really try to help the developers early on. I mean, we know from security issues that buffer overflows and scripting issues are always have been the same security issues. You go to the OWASP, you mentioned OWASP, those top 10 are pretty much the same. So we need to continue that education and to understand that these are the sort of things that make a good code and push those. So I think it's really a teamwork issue, and I talk about this a lot. Security is a team sport, and I think your presentation really talks about that, as we want to be on both ends of that spectrum, right?
Yeah, definitely. I totally agree about the education. I consider education critical. It almost goes without saying, but obviously we need to say it and say it a lot. And maybe even one step before education is awareness. It's the part of where you acknowledge that you cannot protect from things you don't even know about or familiar with. So definitely awareness and education. You talked about the way Checkmarx does that. Yeah, we do make, we have an awareness and education platform called Code Bashing as part of Checkmarx. Some people ask me, wait, you have testing tools. Why do you also do education? And I say that education is probably the biggest shift left you can do. You actually fix the code before it's written. You teach the people. So yeah, so I think that what you said about it's a team effort for sure. And one of the biggest sins of security departments, and I say it as someone who comes from security, and I'm hoping it's changing. The biggest sin is to be just a big wall of no, or just being the people who say no to developers and blocking them, blocking the development and operations. I'm happy to say that this is changing. I think that more and more security departments understand that this is a team effort. This is a shared responsibility by everyone, and the awareness that comes to the developers is a high priority now by many organizations that put the ability or the need actually to make sure that the developers are aware and know what to do. Work together with security people, work together with DevOps people, DevSecOps, and all these areas. This is really not a department thing anymore. It's like you said, it's everything is combined together, and this is the only way to do it these days.
Yeah, and at the top, it does start at the top. You have to have management tie-in, and that's the one thing I think we're seeing a lot more of, is that the management does understand this, because software is a business. No matter what you are making, if you make a widget or if you make a physical activity, you still have a lot of software behind it. I mean, look at an automobile is mostly software. The amount of line of code that is in an automobile is amazing. So anything physical has software, and And then when you go out into the cloud and start pushing your development and your online businesses, that the managers understand that they have to have good software. They have to do it in a timely manner. And the only way they can really make that understood is to lead. And we're seeing a lot more software leaders, I think, in this space.
Yeah, there's a really good question. There's a bunch of good questions I'd like us to get to. Our audience are contributing. One of them, David was asking, and if I remember right, David's a few years into his cybersecurity career. Thank you for sharing that, David. How much is too much? How much is enough when it comes to piling on security to developers, right? I mean, we've all lived in the days of the barking dog and intrusion detection system, right? Okay,
Yeah.
turn that thing off, right? Well, you want to create such a burden or such a pain barrier for developers that they tune you out. Erez, what's your experience of how to achieve that balance?
Okay, so that's a very easy question for me because it's not my job. so I can just say very, very easily, oh, of course, it's a risk issue. You need to calculate your risk, and you need to think how much, what is the risk you're willing to take for your information to get lost, to get, stolen. It's so much easier to say than to do. I think that we see a lot of CISOs, CISOs out there. I think this is the main goal of a good security leader of an organization, is to do that. It all starts with good threat modeling. Not the topic of this discussion, but worth a discussion of its own. Good threat modeling will show you the risks and the ways you need to cover things. Sometimes you may say, okay, this is a risk I'm willing to take because it's not worth it. And sometimes you say, listen, this is the main business of what we do. If this is not protected, we have nothing. And again, the answer is as easy as easy. This is difficult. It's all in the risk, and I don't have any other easier ways to say that.
Well, I'll jump in and say, because I have had to be the person to do this, and am at presence. I think the best thing you can do is make whatever you're asking developers to do. There's this whole shift. By the way, jump side topic. We have a TechStrong conference coming up for July, and I'm talking about shift up, not left, because we can't put everything on the developers. As amazing as developers are, just ask them to do everybody else's job as part of their design of their application or code or software. Yes, we want to shift up. We just don't want to squash them with so much work. So that's on July 14th and 15th. You guys should come do this talk with me. But as someone who's kind of make that call, I think it's our job as security professionals to make sure we avoid the principle of more is better. More information is better. You're talking about education. Yes, more education is better, but not more information, because at some point it's barking dog and I'm going to stop paying attention to it. So if you're going to do code scanning, if you're going to be doing testing for vulnerabilities, you're going to be dealing with things in production, security issues, you want to make sure that what you're providing to that person is making their job earlier or easier and earlier. In other words, I want to be able to see that when I fix vulnerabilities, I get the information, it's obvious about how to fix it, and I can take action relatively easily, versus I got to go to somebody else's application. I got to go look this up myself here. I got to go talk to 3 people to figure, well, that disrupts my flow, and my job's to get software out the door. So you talked about earlier, Erez, the sort of false positive of vulnerabilities and avoiding that. That's certainly a big thing, as well as just think about the developer flow, their workflow. And if you are shifting left, how do you do it in a way that it actually isn't preventing them from getting to their real job, which is writing software?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay, great. There's another question too, a really good couple questions from Philippe or Felipe, however you say your name, Philippe. He's talking about what tools process to centralize an overview of most or all your security alerts and checkups. Is it important? I guess I would phrase it this way: is it important to have a dashboard? Is that something developers are going to watch? Who are those kinds of roll-ups of alerts and management of that, whether it's in the development cycle or in a production environment? What's the best approach for that? Some good practices you might suggest, RS?
I'm going to say that regarding specific tools, I'm not sure that I can recommend any specific tool for that. I think that when we talk about practices, let's start with understanding that developers are not interested in dashboards. They will not go into dashboards. They will rarely leave their CLI or ID. And we really need to understand that. And we really need to enable them to keep that. I don't want them to flip to anything different than what they're using already. When we're talking about tools and dashboards and aggregators, we are usually talking to the level of application security managers, CISOs, around these areas. For these people, I say use whatever is simple enough for you to get the information you need to make a decision. Again, this is something that is easier said than done, but what I was saying in my previous when I showed my presentation of the vision is that what we believe is that dashboard is not enough. A dashboard that aggregates the results is not enough. We want a smarter dashboard. We want a dashboard that correlates or mesh up the results. And this is something that the future will have to provide us because things are getting hectic, and this is part of the holistic view. I don't know more than that. Maybe SOC teams also may be interested in in these dashboards and aggregators, but not in these areas of development. Probably later. What do you guys say? What do you see when you talk to CISOs about their need of dashboards and control?
So I totally agree with you. This is not a developer component. It is the CISO, and it really comes down to visibility. And I think you mentioned it too, or it's been mentioned. You can't really protect what you don't see, and you need to get a better understanding of this. So it really is a management issue of being able to get a better picture of your whole security aspect of how many vulnerabilities you have, where are they coming from, how quickly have they been resolved, and do you need to make that risk determination of do we release this or do we not release it? When do we issue our next patches? So again, all of that is going to be a management and a QA component. You don't want this. This is really getting into the weeds, I think, for the development aspect of it, because software security is a software quality issue, I believe, and that's where the centralization really needs to come into play in this space. So it's possible, and I'm kind of new to the discussion of where your software software composition analysis is that something, because it's software inventory, that you're able to pull in information about all of the different areas with a holistic view. But let the developers do what they do well, and use an aggregator to help them. Maybe there's certain areas that are troublesome, and you can go back and do the education there, and encourage them to use a different form of code, or even a different open source. So it's a completely different animal. You're not creating 100% of your code anymore. You're doing a lot of sharing of code, and that's why you have to centralize those reports too.
If I can jump in too, I think you're right. There's sort of what's the best world for developers to live in. And you mentioned Erez incorporating within the IDE environment, in a non-intrusive way as much as possible. Make it as useful and as beneficial to put it there as possible so they can fix things while they're working on it, while they're working on other bugs. There's sort of the software architecture side of it too, which is where software engineers, architects, et cetera, can work together with security engineers on how they're building the application, deploying the application, thinking about potential scenarios that they may deploy. Because I highlight that not just to bring us together, but the thing that's sort of looming out in the horizon, but is really sitting on our shoulders, is the business wants flexibility. The business wants to be able to pivot, change, go after, launch a new product, go after a new market, defend against something that's happening. And they want to do that in days, not months and years and quarters, right? So they're looking for resilience as well as the ability to respond. And software has gone from sort of this thing in the side to the thing in the middle. And so that's, I think, where that collaboration between security engineers, architects, software architects can really be thinking together about what those scenarios look like. And then, as you mentioned, Charles, there is the what's happening in my business for the CISO and security team. The interesting dilemma is that I think we're moving from just having a dashboard or a better SIM, right, if you will, that has more stuff in it that I don't have people to go respond to anyway. What do I do with all that stuff, right? To helping us with actionable intelligence that we can, and how we work with software teams, how we work with software's infrastructure, operations, SRE, whatever it might be, that are part of our infrastructure as well as our applications. Because CISOs are one of the trends right now is CISOs are becoming more than a CISO. They're oftentimes starting to combine their job and be the CIO too. Why? Because all this stuff is interconnected. And it's not happening everywhere, but CISOs have kind of moved out from under the CIO to be a parallel function in the organization. And now oftentimes they're becoming a CIO, CTO, some combination of the application and the infrastructure as well as security. So that creates a whole nother sort of set of challenges and information and actionability around what those teams need to respond to. So, I mean, I don't mean to make the problem bigger than it is, but that's really how big the challenge is and how organizations are both responding to it and can respond. Yeah. I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts. If you think I'm all for
you mentioned,
challenge me.
No, you mentioned the evolution of the CISO. I think that a lot of things are are easier to grasp when we see CISOs that come from application security roles. I think that most, again, I don't have numbers to back that up, but I think that most of the CISOs I know come from sometimes network security or other areas of security. Those who come from application security usually are a bit more prepared to the challenges we have these days because of that, because of the software, the understanding of software, and that software is currently really everywhere and everything. So this is something I noticed. I'm not sure this is worth mentioning as a trend yet. It's kind of anecdotal. But yeah, this is part of the evolution and part of the understanding that application security is not what it used to be 5 and 10 years ago, for sure.
Mm-hmm. I love our audience today. I say audience, they're really participants in this with us. Some fantastic questions. Sherry asked this really insightful question. I think a lot of folks are dealing with, trying to figure out. Her questions: are you seeing new challenges in static and dynamic security management as Kubernetes controllers become more popular, especially when disparate applications are integrated within a cluster? So it's not, one app sitting in across your Kubernetes clusters. It's several. And of course, that's changing, right? It can change on the fly all day, every day. Moments ago, the security threat that occurred, for instance, the configuration for that may be completely different by the time we actually see it and can look into it.
Yeah, so the traditional code was code. Look at the code, see what it does, run it, move it to production. What Sherry describes here is the magic of current solutions. And like Sherry, all of us are now bothered about many layers of different security aspects. So we have this small code portion that's running inside the Docker or managed by Kubernetes. It can be there can be just one copy of that. There can be a swarm of similar things or identical applications running. This is all running and being orchestrated by different orchestrators and message buses and API gateways and infrastructure as code. It runs eventually somewhere on the cloud. Each and every one of these words I just mentioned have their own issue and their own problems with security. And the connection between them is where we see the weak areas. So if we had a monolith software 15 years ago, we know that the attacker or user, let's talk about the user had to go through a specific flow of code to be authenticated. He has to go from A to B, and then in the monolith, he would go from B to C and from C to D, and that's it. Now everything is microservices, everything is deployed in a different place, everything is done by different teams. A user would still go through A and then be thrown to B and C and D, but an attacker would not. An attacker would check A. If they cannot enter, they would check B. If they cannot enter, they would check C. And things that are not open to the outside are now very much part of the endpoints of what we have. So this grew exponentially, and we see that especially when we talk about these different applications and clusters and the APIs between them. So definitely this is a challenge. And when we talk about testing, sometimes the dynamic testing have hard time to find all these endpoints. This is one challenge. And regarding the static testing, this is what I discussed earlier. We sometimes really have a problem of connecting all the dots, and there are many dots now, and this is the big challenge.
So we literally have almost 2 minutes left, and I want to get one more question. So, if you guys, this is a lightning round, so 30-second answer. To our last question. Felipe has really been asking us in the background to recommend some products, and we're not really here to do that today necessarily, but let's address this question. Don't you need a central place where all the alerts and all the security information is going to be able to manage this? Would you say that's a best practice? Charles, you want to jump in 30 seconds?
Yes, it's definitely
$20,000.
Yeah, definitely a best practice. And as we kind of mentioned before, it is to give that visibility. To make that risk decision, you have to have, as Erez has mentioned, you have to have that holistic view.
Okay, Erez.
Yes, have it centralized, have it early, have it clear and actionable, and have it part of your journey, not only to make your software secure, but also to educate and make sure it does not happen again.
Excellent. Well, good. We just have just a little over a minute here to kind of wrap things, actually 1 minute to wrap things up. I want to thank both of you. We've got to give away some gift cards. We have 4 winners of our gift cards. If I can pull that up, I lost it here. Our 4 winners are Sherry A., Eric T., Brad C., and Carl M. And the good folks at Security Boulevard will be in contact with you about getting to that. I wish we had a whole nother hour, because we could definitely dive deeper into some of this, and just given the level of interaction from our participants with us today, I think it's hitting the mark, no pun intended, on the topic. It's something we're all dealing with. And the great thing about these kind of forums is we can share experiences and maybe questions we don't know the answers to yet. And so I want to really thank both of you for bringing such a rich set of experiences, having been in this industry and working on these challenges for a while. So thank you, Charles, from Accelerated Strategies, and Erez, thank you very much from Checkmarks. People can go to checkmarks.com, right, to find out more about your product. So we would appreciate folks to do that. And we are at the top of the hour. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. We hope that you're well. So be careful out there.
All right. See you later.